Hi folks, Dr. Bowman here. Welcome to today's class. Due to having a snow day last Thursday, we're kind of combining the lab and the lecture into this class period. And luckily, what we're going over today is pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't be too difficult to do this sort of like remote digital futuristic kind of lesson, I guess. The parameter or effect we're going to look at today is equalization, or EQ. And this is a plugin or effect that is in the frequency domain. So basically, equalization is the go-to plugin for affecting the amplitude or presence of certain frequencies in your sound. All of you have probably experimented or played around with an EQ before. A great example would be a home stereo or a car stereo, where you have treble, mid, and bass knobs or faders that you can kind of turn up and down. And essentially what this is a 3-band EQ, 3 frequency bands. And each one of those knobs, treble, mid, and bass, each have like a range of frequencies that when you turn the knob up, it increases the amplitude of those frequencies. So treble, when you turn it up, is going to increase whatever that manufacturer has arbitrarily defined as the treble frequency range. And so on and so forth with mid and bass frequencies. So we can boost frequencies in terms of amplitude, and we can reduce them. So those EQs are relatively simple, and Ableton gives us a lot more control. So first, let's just drop in, let's go to our downloads or our files, and if you haven't already downloaded the audio clips that I sent along in the email with the link for this video, please download the audio clips. And let's just take audio clip 1 and drag it over into our project file. This is a bit of Beethoven. And why don't we double click on the banner here, open up our editor window for the waveform, and let's just turn up the overall gain or volume on this. And as I increase this value, you can see, if you look at the waveform, it's actually getting larger too. So we've kind of just increased our volume a bit. This is a very soft audio excerpt. Let's also, while we're at it, let's get your looper, wherever that may be, and basically just adjust it so it encompasses this audio region, and turn it on. So basically you don't have to kind of start and stop and all that stuff. Okay, great. Let's just give a little listen. Yay. Sounds good. Cool. Well, let's do some things to this with equalization. So we're going to go up to our menu, or to the left where our menu is, and not the very top button because that toggles the menu in and out of our site. Let's go to this button here, and this will be basically all the local in-house Ableton effects, plugins, and instruments, and so on and so forth. And let's go down to Audio Effects, and we'll hit up EQ. We can see here that we have EQ8 and EQ3. First, let's drag in EQ3. This is the more basic version of it. This is sort of like your car stereo, right? Where we're really just given high frequencies, mid frequencies, and we can adjust, and low frequencies. And if we just, I want you to try to just play the audio that we have there and toggle around with these and see what happens to the sound when you adjust these parameters. You can just pause the video for a moment. Okay. Now that you've played around with those, okay, that's great. We can do some adjustments in terms of the EQ, and hopefully that kind of reveals what it sounds like when we boost just the high frequencies, low frequencies, mid frequencies. Of course, you probably heard that before. We can adjust also the range of these specific parameters here with these high frequency and low frequency knobs, and that kind of just tells you where the cutoff is for these frequency bands. So basically, we could set this to 440, and it would be like this knob would control everything below A440, and then this knob would control everything above 2.52 kilohertz, and then the gain for the mids controls everything else. This is basically like your car stereo, but we want more control than that. So I'm going to delete that by clicking on it and then just pressing delete. Excuse me. I'm going to click on EQ8 and drag it in here. Okay. Now, this is getting to be more like the EQ that you'll get to know and love. This EQ is a graphic EQ. And so what we are seeing is on the x-axis, left to right, you can notice down at the bottom of the screen we see 100, 1K, and 10K. What those are representing is frequency in hertz. So these are very low frequencies with 100 hertz and below to around 20, which is the range of our hearing, up to, and this is 10K, and this goes up to about almost 20K, I believe. Yeah, 22 actually. And so this is the full range of our hearing, essentially. And we can see this graphically. So the x-axis is our frequency. So our y-axis is our gain, or our amplitude. So we can see right here it's 0. And if you drop this in and then play your audio, it won't sound any different than if this line is straight and it's like the default. You can turn this off, turn it on, nothing's changed. This default setting on EQ does nothing. There's 0 gain happening with any of the frequency bands. So what we need to do to turn this thing on, or essentially make it do something that we can perceive, is to either boost or reduce frequencies. There's a lot of ways to do this. Probably the most common way to kind of play around with this is just to grab onto one of these nodes by clicking and holding, and then start to just pull it all around. What you can do with this, oh, everyone say hi to Ella. She must have seen some squirrel outside. That's my dog. So, take a moment and play around with this, play the audio, start to boost and reduce certain frequencies and see what you can come up with, and pause the video and come back in just a couple of minutes when you've done that. Okay. Great. So we can certainly just, and if you release, I should mention that, you can, once you release your finger, the EQ will latch onto that position. So to the left, we also have knobs and dials that essentially do the same thing that we were just doing, but in a slightly less dynamic way. So if I select node 3 and I adjust the gain, it's only going to adjust the volume, and I can adjust the frequency separately. So each of these, the frequency controls the x-axis only, the y-axis is controlled by the gain knob here. And then we also have another knob at the bottom of the screen called the Q. This will determine how wide or narrow our frequency band is. And a frequency band is just a frequency range, right? So, in essence, this is kind of what we had going on in our EQ3. You can imagine we have 3 different bands. Okay, here's 3 frequency ranges, right? And let's say we were on a car stereo, want to turn up the treble. This is kind of what it would look like. It would just turn up the treble over here, or turn down the treble, right? This frequency range that we have. And this frequency range, okay, we turn up the mids, it's going to do something like that. Now, we can adjust this range, though, which is great, by making it very narrow to include essentially just one pitch, right? We can make it very wide to encompass essentially almost the whole range. This gives us a lot of abilities. One ability, let's say, is to just boost a large portion of the high frequencies, like this, but also a very small portion of like this frequency band. I don't know what this is going to do to the Beethoven. Probably not a lot of good things, since the Beethoven is already a professional recording. But you can try these things out, and boosting little small areas. As it's playing, kind of do something that's known as a comb filter. When you have a really narrow frequency band, you can press play as it's going, and then boost it really high and do what's known as combing, and that's essentially just going up the frequency range. You hear that whistling kind of in here? That's me adjusting it, and that's the frequency that I'm basically boosting, that kind of whistly tone thing. Good. So we can be very broad with how we boost our frequencies, and we can be very narrow with how we boost our frequencies. We can also have different shapes, as we can see down at the bottom of the screen here. There's a bunch of different kind of shapes that we can choose. Now, some of them are assigned shapes already, and some of them aren't. So it looks like everything is assigned the same shape here. So let's change these a little bit. And a lot of times 1 will be in the lowest frequency spectrum, the lower frequencies, the slower ones. Let's change that to this shape here. Okay. Essentially, that's going to cut out our lows, or it's a low cut, we could call it. Experiment a little bit with this while playing the audio file, and basically essentially cut out all the low frequencies, or to a certain arbitrary, subjective, wherever you want to place, and just see what it sounds like when you cut out like basically an entire group of frequencies. You can do the same thing with the highs. Click on number 4 and click what's known as a high cut filter. We're cutting out all the highs. We can make something sound sort of like a telephone if we have this sort of shape. Take a couple minutes to experiment with that. Excellent. Okay. Very cool. So let's look a little bit about, let's look at a couple more of these shapes. If I click on this one, this is called a low or a high shelf here. This is an easy way to boost a bunch of high frequencies in a pretty flat way, meaning an equal response from all these frequencies up in this register. You can see this is just flat, and they're boosting them all the same amount. You would use this high shelf, turn the Q up quite a bit, and then you get this nice shelf there. And try that with the Beethoven, just boosting the highs just a little bit. You'll notice what will happen is they'll just become a little bit brighter. Or if you reduce this below, now listen to the Beethoven with this configuration. See how it just kind of subtly dulls the sound and makes it a little bit more distant and veiled. These are very subtle applications of EQ. Boosting a little bit of the highs, a little bit of the lows. This is sort of what they do in mastering. Very, very subtle changes in EQ to kind of, will ultimately, these little details will give you an amazing detailed sound, a very professional sound. So we can boost or reduce, or we can do the same thing over in the low frequencies. We can get a low shelf and just kind of boost, reduce some of the low end there. There could be some low rumble from the microphones. A lot of times with recordings, and I'm sure they've done it with this one already, but a lot of times with recordings, you'll have a lot of low frequencies that aren't adding anything to your recording, sometimes practically subsonic. And what I always do with audio recordings, unless they have just an incredibly low bass frequency content, is I always just cut out all the lows like this. And that usually takes care of any unwanted frequencies, because essentially we don't really have any, especially in an orchestra, you don't really have too many instruments getting anything below this frequency range here. Okay, so what are the uses for EQ? Let's go through these a little bit. One is the subtle things that I talked about in terms of boosting a little bit of the highs or a little bit of the lows. Or rather, boosting a little bit of the highs or reducing a little bit of the highs, or boosting a little bit of the lows, reducing a little lows. Can do the same thing with the mid frequencies, right? We can create these kind of dips and boosts. You can also have like a huge dropout here. This is especially excellent for kind of cutting out any kind of unwanted pitches and so on and so forth. So we have all this capability. We can do these subtle differences. We can also do drastic differences, like effects. You can get kind of like a telephone effect, because telephones essentially only use a very small frequency band. That's why it sounds like a telephone, is that we're only really accessing a very narrow band of frequencies, which reduces the amount of information that we have to send and just made it more efficient. The older telephones, rather. So something like this would be like a bandpass filter. And, oh, laundry's done. A bandpass filter, this is going to give you a very specific sound and effect that you can use in different ways. You can essentially focus on different frequency ranges by kind of moving this around if you wanted to. Okay, just these certain highs and so on and so forth. So we can use it for effect. We can use it for subtle shaping of the sound. Now I'm using EQ on like basically an orchestra right now. Of course, it's going to change when you use it on single instruments. And you can boost or reduce certain qualities of that instrument that will just make it sound better, brighter, bigger, whatever you want it to sound like. You're going to sculpt that sound. This is really how you can sculpt the timbre of things. Another use, so we talked about a little bit about kind of large-scale boosting of certain frequency ranges. We've talked about a little bit about the effects that you can get really focusing only on listening to certain frequency bands. Another use for it is cleaning up audio, cleaning up low unwanted frequencies, cleaning up high unwanted frequencies. And in fact, I want to do a little bit of that right now, a little exercise in kind of cleaning up some audio. And essentially what we're going to do is let's drop in audio clip number 2. And once again, let's boost this a bit so we can have a little bit more volume. And lastly, let's, we got an EQ on it, great. What I've done is inserted a pitch or a tone that is not very desirable in this sound. Okay, it's the same Beethoven, but I've inserted one like sine tone in this sound. So this will be a practice and something that maybe all of you will find eventually useful one day in audio recordings or some other kinds of recordings is how to take out a bad note or how to take out a wrong note. So this will be a little exercise in how to take out one specific frequency from your audio file. And I have 3 examples of this. Audio 2, 3, and 4 all feature one kind of sour, weird note. Now, first of all, we have to hear it. And I've tried to make them pretty obvious, but you never know. So if we play the first one, why don't you just listen to the first one. Even me listening right now, I can hear that. Maybe some of you will recognize that tone as a 440. Cool. Well, I don't like it. I don't like that tone. So let's take it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our number 2 or 3 or whichever node you want, but basically one that's on this filtering, this shape here. I'm going to boost it, and I'm going to turn the Q all the way up, make it really narrow. Okay? Good. So what I want you to do is play it again, And as you're playing, do the comb filter again. Slowly, you can hear the whistling. Just kind of going through this. Sometimes it gets stronger. It's more prominent. It's because either you're hitting overtones of that or you're hitting literally that note. Good. Actually, this is not A440. This is an octave above that. This is 880. So some of you probably recognize it as A, just an octave above. Okay, so as you come through, at some point, probably, I would assume, when you hit 880, or around 880 here, this is 797, and then you can just type it in as well. So just type in 880. Press return. Okay, it takes us right to that. It should be really, okay. The tone should be a lot louder now. Basically because you're boosting that specific frequency of 880 hertz, which is the tone that I inserted. Okay, we found that tone by combing through and boosting it. Now we want to reduce it. Oops, that's not how you do it. Gain. Boom. Now let's play it and see if that tone is gone. It's much less. But it's not gone, is it? Of course, if we move it outside of 880, it gets much more prominent. So we're doing something by having it at 880, right? So that's not totally there. What could we do to make this even more impactful? Well, click here so it turns yellow. Press copy. It's Command-C. And then Command-V. Now let's listen. Wow. Maybe I can hear it a tiny bit in the background. But you can also copy it again. It's absolutely gone. And it really hasn't affected the other audio. And part of the reason why is that we don't have a lot of those notes happening. Because it's a sour note. It's not in the key. Let's try the other ones. So this is one way you can reduce a specific pitch. We actually locked in on that frequency 880 here. We had it boosted before, and we had to find that frequency. Of course, it won't just be obvious to you necessarily unless you look for it. Like we knew that was 880 because I said it was. But you'll have instances where you have to find the frequency. And that's what I'd like to do right now. I've audio 3 and 4 also include some pretty sour notes. And so I'd like for you to take the time now to pop those in. Once again, you'll probably have to increase the volume here. And play that. Now this one has an extremely high frequency that is out of place. In one way, if you want to toggle back and forth between the original and this, is you can drop in audio clip 1. And I would actually advise taking the warp off of these, though it doesn't really matter too much in this instance. So you can toggle back and forth between soloing between these to see if you can pick out what the difference is. We listen to this one, listen to this one. It's a pretty noticeable, really high frequency. Now, go through that process again. Create a really spiky node where the frequency band, where the Q is all the way turned up, and comb through your frequencies. We obviously know it's going to be pretty high up there. Comb through them, try to find the frequency, and then once you think you found it, because it's going to get louder, much louder, you're going to reduce it like that. And then you may also have to copy and paste this a couple times to really get that frequency out of there. See if you can find that frequency and check back with me in a second, and I'll kind of tell you what it is. Okay, this is a very high frequency, and I'm going to kind of comb through this a bit and see if I can find it. I'm not getting a whole lot yet. Oh, it got a lot louder. Right around here. 11.3-ish. Good. I'm going to turn it down now. And then I'm going to copy paste. Should be completely gone. Just like the original. All right. Let's try the very last one. So we'll boost this again. Good. We'll listen. This one seems to be more in the mid frequency. Obviously, you can toggle back and forth. Excuse me. This is one that's a little bit more subtle. So, once again, comb through the filters, see if you can find this frequency, and then reduce it. Take it out of this recording. Pause the video and check back, and I'll tell you what it is. Okay. So as I'm coming through, I find that there is a big boost in that sound, right around 227. Wow, yeah, that's there. I'll take that down, reduce it. And it's gone. So this is what engineers do when they want to take out a sour note of performance. You can also add notes, although that wouldn't necessarily be with the EQ. And so EQ has kind of an insane amount of functions. We only scratched the surface today. One is the kind of subtle boosting of kind of larger frequency bands. Another is the cleaning up of audio by cutting out whole frequency bands. Another is effects, focusing just on one set of frequency or frequency bands. And there's also a utility aspect where obviously cleaning up audio, like I just said before, and certainly cutting out unwanted frequencies is certainly one of those utilities that you can use it for. Now, enjoy playing around with this for the remainder of the class. Maybe one thing you could try to do is take that moonwalk audio from last time, drop it into the program, see how well you can clean up that audio, how well you can make it sound. Otherwise, look out for an email from me about Thursday, and have a good week. See y'all.